Okay, is that better? Helps if you know what you're doing. All right, so the antipode of Vietnam is over here in the South Pacific Ocean. So when you say, well, Vietnam's on the opposite side of the world, well, no, not really. We're over here. The opposite side of the world for us is down here. So it's kind of similar to Chile and Peru, that part of the world, off in the Pacific Ocean. They're 13 hours ahead of us, time-wise. If you look at the geography of the other countries around there, you'll see this is Vietnam right here in the blue. This is big old China right here. Russia looks a lot bigger than it is. That's because the map is straightened out to look flat. You know, the earth actually curves up, but it's a big country too. And then the neighbors of Vietnam are Laos and Cambodia, just to the west. Then Thailand. Across the ocean here is the Philippines and Malaysia. So that kind of gives you an idea where they are. This is a little bigger picture of it. Who are the land neighbors? China, Laos, Cambodia, here's Vietnam. By sea, though, they got a lot of neighbors. All these other countries around here are neighbors, and we'll talk a little bit about that, because all these folks are eager to use the resources of the South China Sea. This will give you an idea on how the size of Vietnam is. It's kind of like driving from Florida to upper Michigan. It's a bigger country than you might think. It's long and skinny. It ranges anywhere from 30 to 310 miles wide. It's very narrow here in the middle, pretty wide up here at the top. Yes?
Quick question. You mentioned that the climate is not as extreme as the U.S.?
That's right, and I'll have a couple of slides here shortly on that. This is the highest point in Vietnam. It's 10,311 feet. That's up here in the north. That South China Sea is 0, so there's a lot of flat land, there's a lot of mountain land. Okay, question. Vietnam is at about the same latitude as which of these three?
Chile, maybe.
Well, we've got three choices: Kansas, Florida, or Central America.
Central America.
Central America, that's correct. All right, see, got to pay attention. Okay, Vietnam's big brother to the immediate north is Russia, China, or Korea?
China.
Correct. Distance from South to North Vietnam is the same as from Florida to Michigan, Georgia to Virginia, or Mississippi to Tennessee?
Florida, Michigan.
All right, good. These are easy questions. They'll get harder, so pay attention. All right, this is a map, kind of shows the different regions of Vietnam. In general, most of the time, Vietnamese refer to the north, the central, and the southern Vietnam. They call it Bac, Minh Bac, and Minh Trung, and Minh Nam. It can be further divided into other smaller areas, but there's some distinct differences in these areas. There's different dialects, and there's different terrain, different cultures, a little bit different cultures. They're all Vietnamese, though. They all share the same language and the same basic cultures. This shows the terrain of Vietnam. The green is kind of lowlands. You have the Red River Delta up here in the north. It's pretty flat. You have the Mekong Delta in the south, very flat. This whole area around here. Saigon is in here. Hanoi is up here. And then you have a very thin strip of coastland with a little bit of inland. In some places, the mountains come all the way out to the sea. Maybe some of you have heard of Hai Vang Pass. That's right about here. The mountains come all the way out into the sea. So to get from north to south, you've got to get across that pass. All right, climate. This is some climate data from Hanoi, comparing Hanoi in the north to Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon in the south. So in the north, there's not as much rain as in the south. It's cooler during the winter. it's often cloudy and kind of gloomy. In the south, lots of rain, and it's warm to hot all year round. There's frequent flooding. This is a climate classification chart that shows the differences. You can see the green area. The green is a temperate climate. That means you have a dry winter and a hot summer. The dark blue, which is right here, is tropical rainforest. That means it rains a lot. The rest of the country, most of it is lighter blue. That means you get a lot of rain, monsoon rains. And then certain areas you don't get as much. It's called savanna climate, which is a little bit less rain. But most of Vietnam is all wet. And the part of Vietnam that we were in would pretty much always have rain, lots of rain. Okay, Vietnam is very hot and never has any snow. True or false? True. True. False. Okay, remember that high point I showed you earlier? 10,331 feet. This is Phan Xipang. It's a big, tall mountain in North Vietnam, and there's snow on top of it. So false. All right, this is the Mekong River Basin. By basin, I mean if it rains anywhere inside the boundaries of this red line, the water's going to drain down towards the Mekong Delta. What isn't absorbed in the earth or evaporated is going to go out to the South China Sea through the Mekong River, right here. So this whole area, all the way up into China, see, this is China up here. This is Laos. This is Thailand, part of Cambodia. So it's a vast area of land that drains into this delta. This is zooming in on that delta. This is the Mekong River, and the Mekong River divides out into several distributaries that empty into the South China Sea. This river is extremely important to the commerce and agriculture in southern part of Vietnam, in the Delta region. Look at the flow rate. The average flow rate per year is 114 cubic miles of water. Cubic miles, what's a cubic mile? What's a cubic mile? It's a box, 1 mile wide, 1 mile deep, and 1 mile high. That's a lot of water, 114 of those. The flow rate of the Mississippi, by comparison, is 127 cubic miles per year. So it's not quite as much as the Mississippi River, but it's a lot of it, and it's all coming out right here in the Delta. Now, it spreads out into 7 distributaries, and there used to be 9 of them. The Vietnamese call this river the Cuu Long, which means the 9 dragons. So this is an old map, dates back to the 1920s, I believe, and it shows the 9 distributaries. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them, as this river spread out into the delta, and this is the names of them. Today, 2 of them are gone. They've silted up. They no longer flow out into the river. So now there's just 7. Why is that? What's happening? Well, what's happening is dams on the river, particularly in China. China has built, I think I counted 9 dams up here in their territory on the Mekong River. Laos has built or is building a few, and Cambodia is even building a few. So the effect of this is that it holds back the water to build the head necessary to drive the hydroelectric generation, which is a good thing for making electricity, but it's a bad thing because now the water doesn't flow in seasons. You don't have seasons where there's a huge amount of water that carries a lot of silt down the river. The total flow over a long period of time is not changed, but those seasonal flow rates are changed. And that is hurting that downstream fishing and the protein supply and that silt and the irrigation water. So that means less water is flowing out into the Gulf. This is just an aerial view of just a small little town in the delta. It's called Ngãi Bay. Ngãi Bay means 7 crossroads. Where are the roads? There are no roads. There's 7 canals. You see these? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 canals actually come together at this little bitty town. This is their means of commerce. This is how they get around in the delta. This is a slide that shows the economic importance of the delta. You see all these little blue-green crossed hatch lines here? These are canals. There's just hundreds of them all throughout the delta that are used to tap water off of the Mekong River and distribute it out into the rice fields and other agricultural endeavors here in the delta. So by damming up those rivers to generate electricity, which is a good thing in one sense, it has hurt those seasonal flow rates that are necessary, and it's a big problem for the delta. This is one of those canals. You see how the canal is higher than the rice fields? So they use these canals to distribute the water around in the delta and then let it out in the delta into the rice fields as needed. All right, another area of concern in this region is the Paracel and Spratly Islands. You probably have heard of those if you watch the news. This is the South China Sea right here. Every country that borders in the South China Sea claims certain territorial limits. Generally, internationally, we recognize 12 miles as a limit of sovereign territory where, you know, the country that's claiming it has control over it, and then there's another distance after that of, I think, several hundred miles that has an economic zone. So they can't keep other people from transporting through that area or moving through that area, but they have economic rights on the area. Well, China has come in here, and the red line here, they're claiming the entire South China Sea is theirs. Well, why is that? Why would they want that? Fishing, oil and gas, transport through the Malacca Strait. You see right here between Malaysia, see this pass that's right through here? This is a very important shipping lane. If you can't go through here to go around Southeast Asia into China from, let's say, Africa and there, then you have to go all the way around Australia. So it's a lot longer distance to go. So this is an important transportation route. So 2 points of contention between Vietnam and China are what? I just said one of them. What is it? Spratly and Paracel Islands, and what's the other? Mekong River, right. There you go, okay. So the countries that border the west side of Vietnam are?
Laos and Cambodia.
Yes, correct. Do you have a question, Daniel?
The island of Hainan, I think that's called.
Yes.
Is it Chinese or Vietnamese?
Chinese. Laos and Cambodia. Okay, so review. These are the questions. Vietnam is about the same latitude as Central America. Vietnam's big brother to the north is China. The distance of the country is about like Florida to Michigan. It's very hot and never has any snow. Well, it is very hot, but it does have snow, so this is false. Both conditions have to be true, right, for it to be true. All right. 2 points of contention are Mekong River and Paracel and Spratly Islands, and we covered that one. Okay, section 2. Now, section 2 is going to be long, and there's a lot of stuff in here, and I'm not expecting you to absorb each and every detail of it. I'm doing this to give you a picture of the depth and breadth of Vietnam's history and how that relates to their thinking and their attitudes and their determination about things. Okay, so if you look at the history of Vietnam, you can divide it up into 6 eras. They're not the same length, they're just kind of eras that define different periods of time. The first period is a rather long period. It's very interesting that it's so specific as to the starting point of that, and there's some degree of legend in this and some degree of fact in that. Then there's a period of roughly 1,000 years where the Chinese kind of had an overlord rule over Vietnam. Vietnam was still ruled by people that were appointed by them, the Vietnamese that were appointed by the Chinese, but a great deal of Chinese influence for about 1,000 years. Then there's a period 3 of expansion. That's about 900 years. You'll see that. And then there's the French colonial rule, not too long, almost 100 years. Then there's a period of 20 years of the divided republics. That's the North and South Vietnam that we hear about. And then there's the 50 years or so since the end of the last war and one reunified country. So if we take this first era, that 2,000 years, it can be divided into 5 periods. And it includes 18 dynasties of the Hun kings. Well, we're not going to go through the 18 dynasties of the Hun kings. That's a lot. And as I said before, there's a good bit of legend in that that's not necessarily proven out with history or other documentation. But the important thing is that that civilization was concentrated up here in what is presently North Vietnam, right in that orange area. It's important to the Vietnamese, however, this period of history is. This is a park in Ho Chi Minh City dedicated to the Hun kings. They've got a big statue of one of them in there. I don't think he really looked like that, but like I say, it's important to them. Okay, so the last period of this era is a period called the Dong Son period. And that's one I do want to start with and talk about that. And the reason for that is because there's a good deal of archaeological work that's been found there and a lot of history that is supported with facts, artifacts, and things like that. So we'll start there. That period lasted from about 1000 BC to about AD 100. So it's the last period of this era. In 1924, there were some fishermen that were scratching around in the dirt in Dong Son and found some artifacts. And so the French moved in there as quick as they could, started excavations. They were good about doing that, although what happened to a lot of the stuff is questionable. But there are 33 additional sites that have been found since then and explored. So it's clear evidence of an actual ancient culture. And these are some of the things that were excavated there. Looks like a bronze axe head of some kind, a bronze drum. You'll hear a lot about these drums, some bells and some knives and various things like that. Pretty intricate work, really. Then there were some they call boat coffins because they were kind of hewed out of a big log and contained the remains of some people. So in this region then, we'll pick up the story here at 257 BC. There were 2 groups of people, Oviet and Lac Viet. And the king of one of these groups conquered the other group and formed O-Lac. This is before the name Vietnam. So this is a mural, of course not a photograph, but a mural that someone has painted showing that event and giving credit to this king. The Vietnamese are very proud of their history, so they celebrate it. They actually have a festival for this dynasty of kings. This guy established his first citadel at a place called Koloi. Koloi is not too far from Hanoi. And this is an aerial view of it, and it shows the boundaries of it. It looks a little bit like a seashell. This is another view of it. So they've actually uncovered this area right here. See, these are outer walls of it, the inner walls of it. This is an aerial view of the central temple area that's been restored. And here's a statue of that king in Saigon. It was put up in 1966. It's still there today. So like I say, they remember and honor these ancient people. So this period lasted 94 years, not too long. And Nam Viet is a term you'll come up to, is a country you'll hear about. It's not Vietnam, it's Nam Viet in this case. And it's just a pronunciation of what the Chinese called the southern area of China, before it was China. They write it, if you convert it to Roman characters, they write it this way, Nan Yu. But in Vietnamese, it sounds this way. Now, the reason I'm stressing this is not the same is because this issue will come up later, and I want you to know this is where it originated. This is where that word originated. So right here is a map showing, if you look at this outline right in here, this is northern Vietnam, comes down to about here, and this is southern China, right here. So this whole area was Nam Viet. This area was Man Viet. This is before China ruled these territories. There's another view of that, kind of comparing. To the side is what North Vietnam looks like today. Okay, so here we come to the start of the Chinese Han's conquering of Nam Viet and the rest of the world. Remember how they moved west and took all this territory over here, or they also moved south and took all this in yellow as well. This was the Han Empire. Okay. So, question. The Yin, Han, or Ming dynasty conquered what is today northern Vietnam? Han, correct. The land called Nam Viet covered exactly the same area as Vietnam does today. True or false?
False.
False. The land called Nam Viet covered exactly the same area as Vietnam does today. False. Okay. All right, so now the Chinese are kind of ruling that area, right? Nam Viet, which is where Vietnam will be. So there's another pair of sisters that are very famous in Vietnamese history, that are honored with statues and celebrations, and that's the Trung sisters. Okay, Trung Trác and Trung Nhi. They are known as Hai Ba Trung. Hai Ba Trung. They led a successful revolt against the Chinese. It only lasted 2 years, and they were executed along with a bunch of followers, but their legacy and their inspiration continues on even to today. This is a celebration in 1957 in Saigon. See, they've got 2 actors on top of 2 elephants parading through the street for a celebration of Hai Ba Trung. This is a statue that was erected in Saigon in 1962. A commemorative first day cover for some stamps showing the statue. The sad thing is that this project was advanced by a person we refer to as Madame Nhu. Madame Ngo Dinh Nhiem's brother's wife. Ngo Dinh Diem was the president of Vietnam at that time. And there was a big coup in which he was killed, and another regime took over. And during that, the rioting and all, the statue was destroyed. So it's no longer there. Don't underestimate Vietnamese women, okay? I know that firsthand.
Do you know any story about that? Is there?
About the woman I'm talking about?
No! Is there any history detailing how they led this coup, or is that?
No, there's a lot of stories about it,
Sure.
but I don't know the details of it. Okay, so China had renamed these provinces of Nam Viet, that whole big area, including that made up Vietnam. And the part that was called Vietnam, they decided to call An Ninh, which means the pacified South. The Vietnamese translated that to An Nam. Now, of that compound word, in the Vietnamese language today, Nam is still there. Nam meaning south, but An, without any accent marks, has no modern Vietnamese translation, so the meaning exactly is lost. But this is important because, remember, the Chinese gave this name to the Vietnamese, and to them it meant the pacified South. Remember that when I talk about the French here for too long. Okay, so after the Chinese Han regained control, after the Trung Sisters' rebellion, there's 502 years now of continuous Chinese overlord over Vietnam. But the lower levels of Vietnamese government are filled with the Mandarin class, people that are educated and approved by the Chinese overlords. The eastern part of Nam Viet, that kind of disappears into China where it is today, so there's no longer a distinction there. The western region, where Vietnam is now, kind of retains its unique culture, including its language, even though there's a good deal of Chinese influence for 10 centuries. Then we come to another point here where another guy, Li Bi, leads a revolt against the Chinese. He temporarily sets up a little country right here that you see in red in the north. That lasts just 58 years. The China regains control. But then, in 939, the Viet people finally gained full independence from China. This guy comes in and leads the Vietnamese forces in a big battle. The decisive battle is the Battle of Bac Dang River. They did win this battle by concealing big wooden spikes into the river, the entrance where the river comes out to the sea at low tide, and then held the enemy back until the tide came up. The ships moved in, and then they held them there until the tide moved out, so they had the ships trapped on all these wooden spikes. The Chinese commander was killed. This map over here, I'll continue to use this map. It's a really good map because it's progressive in that it shows the changes by year. So this is how Vietnam looked at about this time, and you can see this is all now currently Vietnam. But at this point in time, Vietnam was up here in the north. This was not Vietnam down here in the south. That's a mural of that battle of Bac Dang. See the spikes? The ships are impaled on the spikes. Of course, this is an artist's creation of that, but pretty impressive. All right, then the Li dynasty establishes a country they call Dai Viet. Dai Viet meaning the greater Viet. and it lasts for 214 years. The capital is up here in Thang Long, which is now Hanoi. And they start an expansion, the first piece of it right here, being green, into Champa. Champa. Champa is a different country. Champa is down here. Okay, so more time passes, another dynasty moves in, and then you've heard about all the Mongol invasions in the Chinese history, where these people just about conquered the whole world, almost the whole known world at that time. Well, they came down into Vietnam too, except they were beat back. And the hero that beat them back is Tran Hung Dao. Tran Hung Dao is a key military leader in these battles. And where was that battle fought? The Bac Dang River. Well, isn't that interesting? That was the same location and the same tactics that they'd used 300 years earlier, and those Chinese didn't remember that. So they got caught by the same thing again. This is another statue. They love statues. This is Tran Hung Dao statue. This is some currency, 1966 issue, showing his picture. So they like to remember that. The Chinese come back for another 20 years. Then there's another revolt. A guy named Lei Loi, and Nguyen Trai. They lead a revolt against the Chinese for 10 years. Look how Vietnam has grown a little bit. See, they're moving down into that Champa territory. This is a battle map that Lei Loi's campaigns were called the Lam Sung Uprising. Okay. Statue of him. He was known for his unconventional tactics. Isn't that interesting? The troops constantly moved using small units to ambush the regular Chinese Ming army. It took them 9 years to win. Every military training program should include military history. Okay. The Tran, Trung, or Trinh sisters overthrew the Chinese. Correct. You guys are smart. You're quick. The Vietnamese warrior kings, Tran Hung Dao and Lei Loi, respectively led the fight against the Mongol and Ming, the Quyen and the Ming, or the Ding and the Dong? Mongol and Ming, right. Okay. So continuing, into the second dynasty, the guy that we just talked about, Lei Loi, he's now the king. There's continued expansion into Champa. See, the green is growing, right? So they're moving south. And then later we have these three dynasties that are competing for power. They kind of have each developed into rulers in parts of Vietnam, so there's a lot of competition and structure. Let's take a little side trip here to Champa. Champa is an interesting country in of itself. It took about 630 years for Vietnam to conquer all of Champa, and it was assimilated into Vietnam. This is, by some scholars, thought to be part of the reason why there's a Hue dialect. In Vietnam, you have 3 different dialects. And the central part of Vietnam, they call it the Hue dialect. And Hue was kind of the center of Champa, so they kind of think that that may be the reason why there are those dialect differences. There's still about 180,000 of these minorities still living in Vietnam, and its own history is a long one. Their culture was influenced a good deal by India, so most of the Cham were Muslims. That's some of their writing. It doesn't look like Vietnamese at all. It doesn't look like Chinese either. It's very unique, very different. This is one of their remaining temples from the China people. This is close to Phan Rang. All right, so now we've got, we're moving on, we're getting more into modern times now. The Nguyen Empire extends their control into the southern part of Vietnam. See this area right here in blue? This is the Mekong Delta. This area was part of the Khmer Empire. What is the Khmer Empire known for?
Cambodia.
Cambodia, but what else?
Khmer Rouge.
Angkor Wat. Remember that big temple complex that's in the middle of the jungle? That's this same kingdom. So they actually were in charge of this, in control of this area until those Vietnamese, they tell you, you gotta watch them. They moving in. So at this point in history, this is 1771 to 1802, so we're getting into a little more modern history. There's a group of people, three brothers, this is their names here, Nguyen Huay, Nguyen Nyak, and Nguyen Lu. These guys were known as the Tay Son brothers because they were from a town or district by that name in a province of central Vietnam. So these guys worked together and defeat the two other parts of Vietnam and finally establish a unified country. This is a mural at a museum in Vietnam showing that final battle. And they had some help from the Thailand, the Siamese people. So finally we got a unified country. All right, now, Vietnam, it's all the name. So up until this point, Vietnam went by different names, like part of it was Nam Viet, which really didn't have anything to do with Vietnam per se. It was a lot bigger area. Then there was a period was called Dai Viet, and other names were given to it. So the emperor, the emperor now of this unified country wants to name his country Nam Viet. But remember, Nam Viet already existed before. So the Chinese said, no, don't call it Nam Viet, call it Vietnam, because that means south of the U, and Nam Viet means U of the south. You see the difference? Those Chinese didn't want the Vietnamese to be claiming part of China. So that's how Vietnam got its name. Okay, now the conquest of the Khmer area is complete. And then by 1834, these little tribal areas here in the gray, in the central highlands are absorbed into Vietnam. So the Khmer also have a place in the Vietnamese history. They're a very old empire as well, as is evidenced by that Angkor Wat. It took Vietnam 100 years to conquer that little bit of territory in the south, portion of which was given back to Siam. An interesting thing here is that the economic center of that area of Khmer was a little place called Pre Nakor. That has become Saigon. That's some Khmer language, also very different. All right, so here we are in 1834 to 1857. This is the last period before the coming of the French. So this is sort of the finalization of all the territory of Vietnam. The Nguyen dynasty kind of pulls it all together. The capital's moved to Hue, and it's called Dai Nam at this time. This is a drawing of the citadel in Hue. A lot of it's still there. A lot of it was destroyed. There's a map published by the French in 1838, and they used the word Dai Nam. I'm sorry, they used the word An Nam instead of Dai Nam. Now, would that sort of strike a nerve with the Vietnamese to call their country An Nam?
Yeah, history.
Yeah. Okay. So Vietnam conquered all or part of Champa, Champa and Khmer, or Khmer? Champa and Khmer, correct. The last imperial capital of Vietnam was Hanoi, Hue, or Saigon?
Wait,
Hue, correct. All right, here comes the French. They start their invasion in 1858 at Da Nang. That Da Nang is up here, right in here. And they acquired territory kind of incrementally. You can see here the first area they got is this area in the deep south here around Saigon. Then later they got other pieces of Vietnam.
What was their goal?
Their goal was to exploit the land for its resources. We'll see that here shortly. This is how they divided up the area which is called Indochina. They took the south of Vietnam, that first little place, and they called that Cochin Chinh, and they called this An Nam, the pacified south. And they call this Tonkin up at the north, the eastern capital. And then Laos, they called Laos, and Cambodia, they called Cambodia. Now, what's a colony? Well, a colony is a territory where the colonial masters exercise full control. A protectorate is where they exercise external or control over external relations while the local people kind of control things to do with the local country. That was supposedly the difference between, I'm going to back up, this area, Cochin Chinh, which was a colony, and these areas which were supposed to be protectorates. But in reality, they did rule the Cochin Chinh as a colony, and An Nam they ruled indirectly, but through an emperor whose name was Bao Dai. And Tonkin they ruled as a protectorate, but in practice they ruled it more like a colony. So it was a colony. And here's Bao Dai. This is a picture of him. He was a young guy when he became emperor. He was not a very effective leader. He was known as a playboy. But he was the last emperor of Vietnam. I think I already mentioned this. Tonkin means eastern capital. An Nam means the pacified south. Cochin Chinh came from the Portuguese name Cochin, a colony in India. So the French just added Chinh to the end of that, called it Cochin Chinh. So that's how it's got its name. So the Vietnamese, they really resented these names, as well as having their country divided up into three parts and not even get the name Vietnam anywhere in there. So what were the French names of the three colonies? Three countries?
Cochin Chinh,
Yes.
Canton,
Tonkin, yeah.
and pacified south, whatever that.
Well, the countries were, this is actually, I wrote that wrong. This should say Cambodia, Laos, and Cochin Chinh, Tonkin, and An Nam. All right, 1930, Ho Chi Minh forms the Indochinese Communist Party. 1940, the Japanese invade. They take control of all Indochina. 1945, the Japanese are defeated, and the French now want to come back in and resume business as usual as a colony. But the North Vietnamese establishes the Democratic Republic, and the French and defeat the French at Dien Bien Phu. So there's a ceasefire agreed to, and the country is basically split into two parts. The North becomes the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, and the South becomes the Republic of Vietnam. So there we are with a divided country now, North and South Vietnam. That's the two flags of the country. We recognize Bao Dai's government, so does Great Britain. Yim comes in and usurps the emperor, takes control of the South. This is where we begin. We and several other countries, look at the list of countries. It's not just America. It's the USA, Australia, South Korea, Philippines, Thailand, New Zealand. They all provide support to the South. And then in 72, there's a treaty agreed to, and we withdraw. And then 3 years later, the North Vietnamese defeat the South Vietnamese, and the country's divided into, not divided, but reunited. In 1976, they formed the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, which is the current government. So that's the flags of those countries. Okay, so the names of the French divisions were, yep, that's right. These names were resented by the Vietnamese. The review, I'm going to skip to review, and we're going to move into this one. Okay, let's take a quick look at the population. This kind of compares. So here we'll compare U.S. to Vietnam. So we have about 3 times as many people. But look at the population density. And this is not the maximum, this is the average. So, and most of the people in Vietnam live in the coast, along the coast, or in the Red River Delta or the Mekong Delta. So the actual density is a lot higher. Life expectancy is a little bit longer in America for males. It's about the same for females. About the same. There's a higher birth rate. We have a higher death rate. They're growing a lot faster. Population pyramids, these are kind of neat because a pointed arrow like this indicates the population kind of dies off as you get older. Here we last a lot longer, but then we all croak. You know. Unemployment rate, that's kind of interesting. Lower in Vietnam than it is here. Inflation rate's a lot lower. It's a whole lot lower now. The average income, well, it's a lot lower. I did this to show the relative difference. The relative income is 13% of the U.S. income, or looking at it the other way, ours is 734% of theirs. Poverty, just some interesting facts to look at. Cost of living, look at that, see? 63% of what it costs in the U.S. to live there, a lower cost of living. This map shows the population of Vietnamese in the U.S. We have about 2.2 million Vietnamese living in the U.S. A vast number of them live in California. Okay, how many? 2.2 million. Ethnic groups. There are a lot of little ethnic groups in Vietnam. This one starts with showing the different ethnic groups that make up Southeast Asia. If you're familiar with the geography, you'll immediately see that these divisions kind of line up with the countries. Look at this. See this light blue here? That's Cambodia, pretty much the boundaries of Cambodia. This is Thailand right in here, see? Malaysia's down here, and this is Vietnam, and this is China. So, I mean, there's exceptions, but in general, the languages match the countries. And there's ethnic groups, a lot of ethnic groups in Vietnam, 54 of them total. 53 minorities and plus the majority.
That's marked by language?
Marked by language and culture, but mostly culture. Most of these people were mountain people, tribes that lived in the mountains and were more isolated for a longer period of time than those that lived along the coast. The majority of the population lives along the coast. So they're just little clusters of people that are different in various ways, including language and cultures. The map shows the distribution. See, this is the northern mountain areas, and there's a lot of minorities up there. This is the central highlands. There's some, not as many now, but there's still some minorities there. And the green is what's called the Viet or the Kin people, who make up the majority. Same, don't need to show every detail of that. And then you have these two minority groups that are relatively small that are left over from Vietnam conquering these two countries, Champa and the portion of Khmer Empire that was now in southern Vietnam. They are also small ethnic groups, but there's only 162,000, for example, left of the Cham people. They're very colorful and very interesting to see. This is the languages in the U.S. The two major languages are, as you could expect, English and Spanish. 10% of our population is Spanish, is their native language. And then all the rest are smaller numbers. In Vietnam, it's 85% speak Viet, or the Kin people speak Viet, and then all the minorities are very small. But there are many languages. Set an issue of postage stamps commemorating each of the 54 ethnic groups. So it includes the Kin plus all the minority groups. Okay, I look at this. I always think about this scripture, Acts 17:22, and I'll break this apart and say, you know, God made us all. We're all of the same blood. We're all of one blood. We all came from the same ancestors. We were made to be many different nations. We were made to cover the earth. We were planned before we came to be, and our boundaries were predetermined. That's what Scripture says. So it should frame our thoughts and our studies of the history of countries and the histories of people to remember this. It's not just random accident. This is just kind of how God had it planned out. All right, question. 43, 53, or 63 ethnic groups other than the majority Kin group? 53. Very good. You all are so smart. The ethnic group, the majority ethnic group is called the Chin, the Kin, or the Lin?
Kin.
Kin, correct. Most minorities live in the big cities, the mountains, or the coastal plains? The mountains. The minorities were called the Chine or the Montagnard by the French. The Montagnard. All right, here's something you'll find very interesting. Let's look at the U.S. first. The most common last name or surname in the U.S. is Smith, and there's 1% of the people, and everything else is very small percentage, right? I mean, everything else is similarly small. There's no huge majority, but look at the Vietnamese. 39% of them have the last name Nguyen, and then the next percent is Tran, and the next is Lay. So that's kind of hard, isn't it? I mean, you can, you know, if you're a Smith, you can do your genealogy and kind of find the Smiths, but if you're a Nguyen, you got a lot of relatives.
So there were several Nguyen, like dynasties that rose up.
That's,
Is that what that's from?
That's right. That's exactly right. You got it. So the people were kind of given the last names, or maybe even in some cases made to take the last name of the new ruler. There's even recorded history of that. So it's just not that many family names in Vietnam. Now this also shows you something else that's interesting. The names are written in reverse order of the American names. So when you meet a Vietnamese person, if they were to write out their name in Vietnamese, they'd write it like this. See? The last name first, then the middle name, and then their given name. See? Backwards of the way we write it.
But you address them verbally by their given name?
Yes. There's some use now of both the father and mother's name, family names, and the last name, but I don't know how extensive that is. And the family names were assigned and sometimes changed in history. There's examples where, you know, the new leader comes in and says, okay, all y'all are now going to be part of the Trine clan. These are some given names. Joe, one of my daughters. Kim, another one of my daughters. Twee, another one. Somebody I know here. These are male names and their meanings. All right. So one of the interesting things about it is name tags. The name tags in Vietnamese show the given name, not the family name. So when you're dealing, let's say, with Vietnamese soldiers as an example, their name tags is different than our name tags. Our name tags show our last name, their name tags show their first name. And you refer to them in this way. See, by their first name, Mrs. Dwight. There's a lot of rules, a whole lot of rules for personal pronouns. You don't have just I and you. You have a whole assortment of personal pronouns depending upon your relationship and the formality of the situation, the conversation. I'll just let you look at this. For example, husband and wife, an im. That's how you refer to each other. But you don't refer to a stranger by that term. Ong bai for someone that's much older than you. Okay. So here's just an example to show you the complexity of that. And I'm not going to go through every little detail of this, but how you address your sisters, brothers and sisters, depends upon your age relative to theirs. So if you're younger, you're always going to refer to yourself as im when you're talking to them. And if you address them and you're older, you'll address them as im. But if they're older than you, you will address them. For example, an older sister, the oldest sister would be chi, hi. And the oldest brother, let's say he's the second child, but he's a brother, and he's older than you, an bai. So you got to really know the relationships to use the right pronouns. And does it hurt your brain already? Yeah, it hurt.
It's about respect, right?
Yeah, it's about respect and status. And
Can you go back to that slide?
sure.
I just want to take a picture of it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if that culture is maintaining through the modern day, or is that breaking down a little bit?
I think it's maintaining.
Wow. Because like
I haven't heard of anything different.
We hear about yes sir and no sir. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of breaking down.
Right. Yeah. Note in that there was no one, so the first person is numbered 2 in that system. This is a chart. I know you can't see the details of this, but this is an ancestral chart. So here you are down here. Here's your father and your mother and your grandparents on the mother's side, on the father's side, and on the mother's side. There are different pronouns to use for each of these people. So but the neat thing about that is if you're Vietnamese and you tell somebody or talk about someone and say, for example, Yi Hai, you know, they will know who you're talking about. They will know, oh, that's your aunt on your mother's side.
Wow.
You know, each one is different. It's a very neat system. All right, personal names are written in which order? Given, middle, surname, surname, given, middle, surname, middle, given. I should have made these questions harder. What's the most common Vietnamese? When, correct. Proper personal pronouns determined by what? Relationship and formality, correct, or seriousness. How do Vietnamese address their grandfathers and grandmothers? I don't think I actually showed you that, but it's Ong Bai. That would be the one. I didn't get down to that detail because I don't want to dwell too long on this. I'll just. Huh? No. All right, I'm going to skip on. This one is a tough one, and I'm going to breeze through this. I'm not trying to teach you anything as if I could, because I can't. I'm not an expert in any of this. But I'm trying to convey to you is an appreciation for the language and the importance it has to the Vietnamese. So Vietnamese is an Austroasiatic language. If you look at this map, you can kind of see, again, the Vedic language kind of fits in Vietnam, doesn't it? They believe that it's more related to the Khmer language than to the Chinese language, but there's some debate about that. This is a chart that shows the most spoken languages in the world. English is number one, as you might expect, most spoken. Second is Mandarin Chinese. Down here at the bottom of this list, it's in the top 20. It's the last one in the top 20. So there's quite a bit of people in the world that speak it, 85 million, sorry. There are 3 languages that have been used in Vietnam. The Han language, which is the Mandarin Chinese language. The Nom language, which is a Vietnamese, native Vietnamese language. It is written in characters that look kind of like Chinese, but it's not Chinese. And then the current language, which is written with characters that are Latin-like characters. That language, by the way, the last language, was made official in 1918. So it hasn't been that long ago that the language was made official. And where did that language come from? Jesuit missionaries, believe it or not. The Jesuits, they needed a way to communicate other than in that Chu Nom, that Chinese-like language is very difficult for them to learn. So they came up with a way of writing down the sounds of the words in a script that they could read. And they used Latin characters with diacritical marks on it. That was the origin of it. The first guy that's known to have worked on that guy was Francisco de Pina. He started on that in sometime around the early 1600s. He published a book on phonetics in 1619. And then this guy, who's the one that normally gets all the credit, Alexander de Rhodes, he's the one that kind of picked up the work and continued it. He was a preacher in these 2 towns near Hanoi. In 1651, he published this dictionary right here. This is the cover of it and a page. And then of that page, I'm blowing up 1 entry. The word is ngui. Ngui. So ngui has many different meanings. This is the Portuguese. This is the English. Well, it means man or the human race. And it had some examples in here. So this fella is given credit for kind of starting the modern Vietnamese language. This graph here shows the Chinese Han writing, the Vietnamese Nom writing, and the new modern Vietnamese writing. And this is the English words. So I go with this one. It's a lot easier to read than that for me, for sure. And you also I want to stress to you, see this? These are not the same, are they? There's a few cases where it may be, like for example, the number 4, the Chinese and the Vietnamese Chu Nom are the same. But for the most part, they're not the same at all. More examples of that old language. All right, so they like to say that this language changed everything for Vietnam, and I think it did. I think it helped for education, probably a lot easier for people to learn that than the older Chinese-looking script. But it started out really as an aid for the Jesuit missionaries, and now it's become the written language for the common man in Vietnam. And there's a saying that says it's the shackle that became the sword, referring to the fact it was developed during the colonial period, or implemented during the colonial period. These are language groups in Vietnam. The green is the Viet language. So that's primarily where the Viet people live, and then you have a lot of little minority languages in the mountainous areas. Guess what the most common second language is in Vietnam today?
Probably would have been French, but now it's probably English.
You're right, absolutely right. It's taught in 60% of the primary schools, and even they start teaching it in the kindergarten type schools, and taught in 100% of the secondary schools.
How long has that been the case?
I don't know, but it's been decades for sure. And when I say they're taught to speak it, I mean they're fluent. They speak very well. These other languages are also taught, but French is no longer really all that important to them. Russian was taught for a while, but not much anymore. Lots of fluent English speakers. All right, Chinese is a Sino-Tibetan language or a Japonic language? Yep. Kind of know that by its name. Vietnamese is of the Chinese or Austroasiatic language?
Austroasiatic.
Very good. All right, in 1492, 1651, or 1812, Alexander de Rhodes published that.
1651.
Good. Modern Vietnamese uses characters similar to Chinese or English? English. Thank goodness. The most common second language in Vietnam is English or French?
English.
All right. English is the first or third most spoken language in the world. And Vietnamese is the?
20th.
All right. Vietnamese is taught in preschool, elementary school, or high school? As early as? As early as preschool. Okay, now, I want you to remember, I'm still in the first grade on this. I really am. I don't want to create any impression that I have any degree of expertise in the Vietnamese language. I have a great admiration for it. I'm interested in it. But it's tough. So if there are any how do you say questions, I'm going to refer that to somebody I know that can answer it. But I can explain some things to you. So this is the 12 vowels that are used in Vietnamese. And these are the 17 consonants. You'll notice some marks on them. So these are actually 3 different vowels. these are 2 different vowels, and these are 3 different vowels, and so on.
Would love to hear those pronounced.
Okay. Then they don't use the F, the J, the W, or the Z, although there is some unofficial use of F. You may see it in an advertisement or something because it has the same sound. And as for pronunciation, we'll look at that here just a little bit later. So, what makes a vowel and what makes a consonant a consonant? You ever thought about that? I never had until I put this together, and I started thinking about it. What makes it that way? Well, it's how you hold your mouth when you breathe, when you're talking. So I want you to try this. If you just say the sound, the A sound, A, your mouth is open and the air is flowing out. But then say the M sound, M. Your mouth is closed and you're constricting your breath and not letting it out. That's what defines a vowel from a consonant. So here we have the all-important, as my wife continues to tell me and hammer me constantly about this, that these accent marks are critical to the meaning of a word. And I have some illustrations for that. But these are the different accent marks. So you have nang, which is no mark. It's kind of a neutral tone. And you have sak, which is a rising tone. And you have huyen, which is a small, kind of a falling tone. Hoi, which just looks like a question mark. Hoi. And nga, which is sort of a up, down. And nang, which is kind of a hard stop. So this illustrates the importance of that. Here's a very simple word, 2-letter word, with the 6 different marks on it, and its meaning. Do you see the problem? If you don't say it right, it can mean who knows what, all right? So we have ma, 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 ma. I'm sure that wasn't perfect, but it's probably good enough for the audience, right? All right. So that, and nearly any word spelling you come up with has at least probably 4, if not all 6 of these tones. So that's what makes it difficult. So you put that together, 6 vowels and those different tones, 6 tones and the 12 vowels, you have a possibility of 72 unique tones. That's a lot. And then you have combinations of vowels that have additional sounds. And then you have several consonant groupings that have sounds. This is a very difficult language for a fat-tongued Southern boy, I promise you. Very difficult to learn.
The tone of voice matters, doesn't it?
The tone of voice matters. So I contrast it this way. I say, in English, the tone is not so critical. I'm not going to say it's never critical, because sometimes we can say something, but we use tone to emphasize something like no, right? Or in that way, we use tone, but we don't use tone in the same way that the Vietnamese do. And for them, it's extremely critical. For spelling in English, who knows? I'm still learning to spell English. In Vietnamese, what a blessing. It's essentially literal. It's pronounced the way it's written, and it's written the way it's pronounced. And that makes it nice. Now, there are slight differences in the dialects across the country, but they're mutually understandable, and they are spelled like they're written. They are written as they sound. In English, we have multisyllable words. In Vietnamese, they're single-syllable words. Sometimes there will be compound words of 2 syllables, but each word is a separate syllable. Another distinctive here is that adjectives in English come before the noun. So we say the big red truck, and they're going to say the truck big red. Adverbs before the verbs, and to them adverbs are after the verbs with one exception. Classifiers. We don't have words that are called classifiers. In Vietnamese, there are many classifier words. Classifiers are words that are used to group things into a category. For example, if you're talking about inanimate objects, their classifier would be kai. So you would say, you might talk about a book, you would call kai sak. You know, that might be an example of it. I might even get that wrong, but the idea there is that there are classifiers that you put various things into, and that helps to differentiate what they are. In English, the word is changed when it changes tense. In Vietnamese, you add a word that indicates the tense. In Vietnamese, the word is changed from singular to plural form sometimes and sometimes not, and this and that, all these rules. In Vietnamese, you add a quantifier word to it. You don't change the word, base word meaning. Pronouns in English are very simple. I, you, that's it. In Vietnamese, very complex. You have a lot of factors. The familiarity and the situation can change the particular pronoun that you use. Sentence structure, the same. Subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object. So here's some simple ones that I created to illustrate the purpose. So Patrick loves Nu very much. True statement. Okay, Patrick, you, Nu, Nhu Lam. Now, I always like to reverse translate things because that tells me if I'm communicating the same thing or not. So I take this and translate it back to English, and I get Patrick loves Nu very much. Good job. Okay, Patrick eats very fast. Patrick ăn rất nhanh. Patrick eat very fast. See, close. Okay, but notice how I didn't say eats over here, because I can't tell from this whether it's eats or not. A big red car. Okay, a car big red. See how it translates out? Your hair is so beautiful. Hair of friend beautiful much. That one didn't turn out so good. Eat lunch, friend. Friend, eat lunch, go. Now, you know, if you're really translating in a contextual manner, you would not translate it like this. You would translate it this way. But this is just to illustrate the literal differences and how the sentence structure is a little bit different. Couple more. Meet me at 10:30 in the morning. Meet me, time, 10:30 morning. Okay. You're going to church this Sunday, aren't you? Friend, will go arrive church Sunday. Yes, no. Yeah. Interesting. All right, here's some example of some Chinese loan words. There are a lot of Chinese loan words in Vietnamese, as you would expect from nearly 1,000 years of having being a kind of a subordinate to the Chinese. Well, there's a lot of stuff that they picked up from the Chinese. Then there's French loan words. These are interesting. Since I know a little French, it makes it even more interesting. Mouchoir, mouchoir. Moussoir. Pomme, chai pomme. This is an example of the classifier. Chai is a classifier for fruit. See, so without that classifier, you really don't know what this is. Bil, bida, billiards. beurre, butter. Café, café, coffee. Cravate, cravate. Pâté chaud, pâté so. See how they kind of drop some of the consonant sounds? It's because they don't have the length of the words are short, so they kind of change their sound a little bit. Pâté chaud, pâté so. Gare, gare. See how they drop the R-E? Film, film, movie. Fromage, fromage. Chocolat, chocolat. Savon, savon. English. I'm not real fond of these. These are I just perused the internet and grabbed some that were online, and I'll just show them to you, and then I'll tell you what I think about some of this. A word like TV, for example, you can kind of see that, TV, data, 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 California, Cali. Why would they do that? Because they don't have multisyllable words, see? So that's a good enough right there to zero in on it. But my opinion of this is that in most of these cases, there's already a Vietnamese native term for these, and there's no reason to be using this except to be cool. So you take like okay, Duc oi. Duc oi already communicates that message, so this is just cool. So you can see the young generation kind of picking up on this and adding these words into the vocabulary. Sandwich, sandwich, banh mi.
Would that be considered disrespectful?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just trendy. Trendy is. Pardon?
Like slang almost?
Yeah, more like just being cool, being trendy. I think that's what this mostly is. But it is what it is.
I'm glad we never do that.
No, we don't do that, do we? We pick up every word possible. All right, penmanship. The Vietnamese are taught excellent penmanship from the very early days. And this is an example over here on the left. This is the actual official chart of how you're supposed to write the letters in Vietnamese. This actually comes from the government school. All right, this is the obligatory color slides, right? Everybody wants to know, how do you say color? This is a list of the colors. I'll let you gaze at that a little bit.
What was the classifier word?
Mao. Mao Ding. Mao Ding is black. Mao San is gray.
Do you know what the Mao means?
Color.
Colors, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Color,
Color, and then the color of the color. Notice this. Mao San La Ke. Mao San Ya Troi. Why is that? Blue and green. I often wondered about that, so I did a little research on that. Well, here it is. So the Vietnamese have a basic root word or pair of words, Mao San, that means blue and green. It's the color blue-green. Then they add these modifiers to it, La Ke and Ya Troi, to mean leaf or sky. So that says color blue-green like a leaf, well, that's green. Color blue-green like the sky, well, that's the sky. And you think, well, that's kind of odd. But I got to researching this and found out that indeed, in many older languages, blue and green were considered the same color, but just different shades of the same color. So they had the same root word. This is even true in Chinese. So I looked up, for example, the Chinese have colors that they associate with cardinal directions, and sure enough, the east is associated with blue/green combined. So the differentiation between blue and green is relatively new in language. I didn't really know that. This is the obligatory number slide. Everybody wants to know, how do you count? Well, here it is. A couple of unique things about Vietnamese is that you see how they write their numbers. For example, this is 1 million, mop true. So 1 period, 000, period, 00, instead of commas. So they use periods instead of commas to differentiate the thousands. There's some other small changes. The form of nam changes to lam after the single digit. See here, mui lam for 15 instead of mui nam. And then fractions are written as mop fan ba. So this means 1 part of 3. That's pretty logical. 1 part of 4. Okay, Vietnamese has 7, 12, or 20 vowels, and 17, 24, or 32 consonants. There you go. Gosh, got some smart people. Vietnamese has 5, 6, or 8 different tones. Vietnamese words change spelling or add modifier words. Vietnamese typically uses the same or different subject-verb order. Same. Loan words from other languages used in Vietnamese are spelled the same as or differently than in their original language. Right, they're basically spelled phonetically as they sound and are pronounced in Vietnamese, usually truncating the ending of multi-syllable words. Tone markings in written and spoken Vietnamese are not critical, somewhat important, or very critical.
Very important.
The names for the colors blue and green, yellow and orange, or red and blue have the same root word. Very good. You got them all right. All right, this is a Vietnamese keyboard program. So you want to type Vietnamese on a keyboard on a computer, you got to be able to type all those marks. So this is a keyboard. I'm going to call it driver, but it's not the right term. But it's a program that you load that interprets the strokes to give you the proper characters. This is a standard that was developed in 1993 that kind of solidified how that would be done. And then there's several different programs on the market that can implement that. When I first started fooling around with all this, I was using this one called VPS Keys, and unfortunately that's the very one that has dropped out of favor. So now I don't have one. Yes?
So to do it, would you use modifier keys?
Modifier
Or with the
keys?
letter keys?
Yes, the accent marks are included in the keyboard layout. So you know which, you have to look and see which one you want, but they're in there. All right, these are some personal thoughts. Believing that your own language is inherently superior, and so are you. Foreigners are ignorant if they don't know your language. Everyone else should learn your language because, add whatever you want. Those thoughts will result in these 3 things: mistrust and misunderstanding, missed opportunities to learn from others or teach others, and the failure of the grandest plans abroad. That's what happens. So another thought is a truly accurate translation will return the same exact meaning in two-way translations. And what I mean by that is, if you translate something from Vietnamese to English, you need to translate it back from English to Vietnamese to see if you get the same meaning that you started with. If you do that, even though the structure might be a little different, but the meaning is the same, you got a good translation. And the same would be true of any other language. Sayings, poetry, songs, etc., they just don't translate. They just don't. Where did all this business of language come from?
Tower of Babel.
Correct, the Tower of Babel. So therefore, mankind will always be humbled by the difficulties of communication between different languages. And I will guarantee you humbled is a very relevant word. I have been greatly humbled by that. Okay, how are we doing? We need a stretch break or continue? Keep on going? Keep going? Majorities keep going? Okay, religion. This is a couple of evaluations or breakdowns of the predominant religions in Vietnam. So I have Catholic, Protestant, Buddhist, a unique religion to Vietnam, Cao Dai, and Hoa Hao, and other, and then a category called irreligion. So this is a 2010 Pew study in the USA. 21% of people are Catholics, 50% are Protestant. Then you have other categories, and then you have irreligion, 22.8%. This is two different measurements in Vietnam in 2014. These are done by the government of Vietnam. I'm going to add a little more explanation to that later, but this is how they divide it out. So according to them, Catholics were 6.9%, and Buddhists were 12.2%. That was 2014, but in 2019, Catholics were 6.1% and Buddhists were 4.8%, making Catholic the largest religion in Vietnam. That doesn't sound right. So what I did here is I looked for some other sources and then adjusted the numbers, and this is what I come up with. 35% are Buddhist, 55% are irreligion, 6% are Catholic, and 1% are Protestant. That's just kind of professed faith, okay? The irreligion category is a little bit misleading, I guess, because it's not that they have no religion. They have some cases a blend of religions, or maybe a common folk religion versus an actual irreligion where you don't believe anything.
What would Ho Chi Minh in?
Pardon?
What would Ho Chi Minh in?
I think he would fit into the actual irreligion category. He did not believe in religion at all. And then here is a pie chart showing that same thing, but I think this is actually a more accurate representation. Approximately 70% are in the folk religion category, and I'll explain that a little bit later. 12% are Buddhist, and you have Protestants, Catholics, and others. So by the 1800s, mid-1800s, the Catholics numbered about 360,000. Most of them were in the north. And then in 1955, when the country split, remember that division north and south? A large number of Catholics moved south. The Catholic Church was historically involved in partisan political activities, including the Ngo Dinh Diem regime. Ngo Dinh Diem persecuted the Buddhists. Actually, it was his brother's wife that kind of led that effort. Okay, so since about 1986, the government religion relationship has kind of steadily improved, still a bit tenuous. The Vatican, they reestablished relations in 2018. Just a little background stuff. This is the Protestants in Vietnam. Protestantism was introduced in 1911, so it's fairly recent, by missionaries affiliated with the Christian and Missionary Alliance. I don't know who that organization actually is. By 1967, there were about 150,000 Protestant Christians associated with these churches, including some Baptist. Over half of the Protestants are the minority tribal groups, those mountain people that we talked about. And those people had suffered some pretty serious persecution. But the situation has improved a lot since 1986. It's acceptable now. These are just some pictures of some of the church facilities. This is the most famous church, Catholic church in Saigon. Likewise in Hanoi. This is a Cao Dai temple in Tay Ninh. This is just a local religion known really only in this part of Vietnam. It's a blend of all kind of beliefs. They were also involved in had a little private army that opposed the Japanese, and then they had another one that opposed the Diem regime in the 1950s. So they're kind of mixed up in all kind of stuff. It's a beautiful building. I passed by this place dozens of times in 68 to 69. It's very close to Tay Ninh, to Nui Ba Den, the big mountain. This is a Hoa Hao, is another indigenous religion. The Buddhist, this is a part of a huge Buddhist complex in Ninh Binh province in northern Vietnam. This is a mosque, a Muslim mosque. All right, folk religion. So folk religion is practiced to some extent by nearly every category of people. And it's a wide range of practices. It's not just one. So it can be as simple as a family memorial, which is not really a worship, but more of a place where you have a picture of your ancestors and you remember them there, to some sort of ritual offering where you make offerings to them, or to national heroes, or in some cases, real or fictitious animals. So there's a broad range of things grouped into that folk religion category. This is just a simple, very common throughout Vietnam. I'd say just about every family in Vietnam, regardless of faith, has a place like this where they put up their ancestors' pictures, and they just have a bowl of fruit, some incense to remember them. This is a Baptist church in downtown Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. It's been there since the 1960s. I don't ever remember seeing it, but it says it's been there. And this is the only one that wasn't closed in 1975. The Baptists have recovered quite a bit since then. They've been officially recognized in 2007. They got about 500 preachers now. This is a bulletin board inside that church. And the scripture that they've got written out on the bulletin board is Joshua 24:14 to 18. So they're doing a Bible study on this scripture. These are one of many, many little house churches throughout, very common in the southern Vietnam. Protestant is Tin Line. If you see that term, you're talking about Tin Line, for example. Hoi Tin Lan. Baptit is Baptist. There's another one a little bit bigger. Let's look at Bible versions. These are, remember, they didn't have the Bible until 1916, really. So there's been many different translations of it. The one in green is the one that I believe is probably the better of them all. It's a translation directly from Greek and Hebrew to Vietnamese. All right, I have picked a scripture, Genesis 1:1-6. This is the Vietnamese writing of it. And this is a non-professional, amateur, subject to error translation done by yours truly, back to English. So you can see kind of how that works. And it's reasonably faithful to the meaning. Yes?
So, did they not have any Bible even when the Catholics came in?
Well, yeah, they had the Catholic Bible, but remember the Catholic Bible really wasn't in the hands of the people, you know. So when I'm talking about Bibles here, I'm really talking about Protestant Bibles. So if you can read this, you can kind of see, looks familiar. Here's another one. This is John 3:16-18. This is the Vietnamese. And this is my translation back to English. Notice how there's 3 words used. It's not because God so loved the world, but it's because virtuous God Lord. If you look back, you'll see the 3 words right here. Because, joy. Okay, this is a cell phone version of the Bible. I've actually got this on my cell phone. It's pretty cool. Sometimes I'll look up something just to see how it looks or how it's written. Religious liberty in Vietnam. It's not like you'd like it to be, but it's officially every person is free to follow their religion. And I think it's pretty much that way now. It's not a big deal anymore. But all religions are technically required to register with and report to the government. That's why I questioned some of that data we saw earlier, because if you belong to let's say a little house church or something, and you're not reporting your data to the government because you're not officially recognized by the government, well, then your part of it doesn't get counted in any of the statistics. Religion is not permitted to oppose the government rules. That's typical of all socialist, communist governments, right? The government is supreme. Everything is under that. Foreign missionaries are prohibited from proselytizing in Vietnam. All this has to be viewed from the perspective of past political activism, because a great deal of evil has been perpetuated by churches. Things have been done in the name of God that shouldn't have been done. Organized religion. What's the highest recognized affiliation? Yep. But Buddhists are still most likely the largest, right? Baptists have about 500. The Vietnamese Bible is translated from the English Standard Version, the Living Bible, or Greek and Hebrew text.
Greek and Hebrew.
Right. And you see the problem if you were to try to translate it from the English Standard Version or even from the King James Version, which is already a translation, the result you would get would be kind of a translation of a translation. So wouldn't be as faithful to the original. Foreign missionaries are legally allowed to or prohibited from?
Not allowed.
Right. The French, Chinese, or Jesuits were the first to introduce Christianity.
Jesuits.
Yep. Okay, culture. The core values of Vietnamese culture are allegiance, harmony, duty, honor, respect, education. Several generations will live together. The children are responsible for the older parents' care. We are like that too, in a sense, but not to the same extent that it is in Vietnam. In Vietnam, the older people do not live alone, generally speaking. They're going to move in with the oldest son. Pleasing parents is more important than pleasing self. Past ancestors are important. You remember your ancestors. Sons live in the parents' home, the wives come to the son's home, and the family grows up real close. Some other historical things that have kind of affected the culture is that, before the French, the country was mostly agrarian, and it was a feudal system. You had kings and lords, and the ordinary people were just ordinary people with no real voice in anything. Then came the transition, and that came about because of the building of roads and schools and industries, and a change from totally agrarian to businesses that produce stuff and consumer market. So the whole society has changed because of that. And out of that came new ideas about what constitutes liberty and equality and democracy. You had a lot of public education introduced during colonial times that has benefited Vietnam greatly, even though its primary purpose was to feed the French colonial empire for the benefit of France. The transition from the Chu Nom, that's the old Chinese-looking language, to the Quoc Ngu, the English character-looking language, that made it a lot easier for people to learn and improve the literacy of the population. So, what kind of cultural influences have been? Well, there's traditional values, things that have been handed down from generations to generations. And then there's the Confucian and the Taoist values, mostly coming from China and that 1,000 years of Chinese influence. And then Eastern values also coming from India and China. And then Western values coming in from France and later America. I think today they just gobble up American culture eagerly. And then there's also socialist values that came from the Marxist-Leninism ideas. There's kind of a blending, Native and foreign fusion, that's certainly a factor. But one thing about the Vietnamese, they vigorously defend their national identity. The Vietnamese, they're as much Vietnamese as Americans are Americans, and maybe more so. They just not that long ago had a war between two halves of Vietnam, but don't badmouth the Vietnamese from the north, because the Vietnamese from the south aren't going to like that, because they consider themselves to be one nation, one people. A lot of things about the culture are very common to American culture, but some things aren't, especially the Confucian and the Taoist and the Buddhist and the communist influences that have been there. I kind of conclude they have a stronger natural culture and national culture as opposed to a more individualist type culture that we may have. These are some mannerisms that you'll see. Men, they greet by bowing slightly and shaking hands. And keep in mind that a lot of these things are transitioning. They're transitioning from the older culture to the more modern culture and the influence of American and other European cultures. Women bow slightly, but they don't shake hands normally. Public display of affection is not acceptable. I think this is changing some, but certainly when I was there, the public display of affection is not acceptable. If you just didn't even hold hands. People of the same sex may hold hands. And when you first see that, I'm sorry, but your immediate reaction is, boy, that's kind of queer. But it's not. In that culture, it's not. Putting your hands on your hips, crossing your arms, huffing up, those are gestures that are not welcome. Being loud, boisterous, arrogant, that's not acceptable. Touching, patting the back of the head, you know, you see a little kid, you pat them on. No, don't do that. That's not a good idea. Don't summon people with your finger like, come here. No, you do it like this. Like that. Which looks kind of, looks fruity, doesn't it? But it's not. It's a cultural difference. You don't wink at people. Smiling doesn't necessarily mean agreement. So, you know, when we smile here, it means we're kind of approving, right? Most of the time, I mean, sometimes there's a smart aleck smile, but
Can it mean confusion in Asian culture?
it could, you know what? It might, because it's a way of relieving tension. The Vietnamese laugh at situations that we would not, and boy, this has bit me several times. You know, I'd do something funny, or, you know, I think one time I fell, I sat in a little chair and broke the chair and fell over, and they were all cackling and laughing, and it just made me mad as a hornet because they were laughing at me. But they weren't really laughing at me. It was just a way to lighten things up. It's a different culture, so until you understand that, it can be very confusing. You don't expect a profuse thank you. And my dear wife and I this is still a question. Sometimes, you know, you'll do something and you're kind of expecting a thank you and you don't get the thank you. And it bothers you, right? Because we're used to saying thank you, oh thank you, oh thank you, oh thank you, thank you, thank you. That doesn't work like that in Vietnamese. Don't misunderstand indirect eye contact. Sometimes people, you know, we like to, hey, look at me while I'm talking to you. But sometimes they don't look directly at you depending on the status, the mutual status. It's just a little funny thing here, but they love to be in photos. So if you're taking a picture, you may have a whole bunch of people in your picture that you don't even know because they like taking pictures. Simple smile over a thank you, sometimes that's all you get. You got to take your shoes off when you come in the house. And don't worry, because the floors are swept clean. I do think things are changing. I mean, there's a lot of Western influence, so there's change. Table manners. I like their table manners. Food is to eat and company is to enjoy. Okay? My mother could not stand it. Rice goes with everything. Right? Because rice is a source of carbohydrates, you know, so you burn up a lot of energy working, so carbohydrates come from rice. It's a good food, so it goes with everything. You use both hands when you eat. You don't follow the European one hand, you know, one hand in your lap or whatever. This is missed typo here, but others are gonna, if you're gathered together with a group of people and you're having a meal together, the person next to you or across from you is likely to grab a morsel of food and put it in your plate, which would kind of bother you if you did that. Here, imagine you come to my house and I stick my knife and throw a piece of meat on your plate and say, what the? Honey, we got to go home. It's different in Vietnam. It's different. Don't turn up your nose at good food you've never tried. I promise you, cleanliness is in all Vietnamese cooking. It comes from the freshness of the food, the fact that everything is washed, the fact that it's a lot of preparation, it's cooked, and there's virtually no stored after cooking food. You eat everything until the next meal. You don't have stuff you put away in the refrigerator. Don't take any more than you're going to eat. When you have to use chopsticks, when you're done, you put the chopsticks down on the edge of the bowl. You pass the serving dish around with two hands. You don't use one hand. One hand is not a good symbol. It kind of suggests that you're maybe superior or something. You're going to sit on the floor. The floor is clean because the floor is swept all the time. Tea is served with the meal. Coffee may be served. You got to watch the alcoholic drinks in Vietnam. They're strong. And there's this modern trend going on here where they like to get together and, have a round of drinks. So, mo, hi, ba, yo. And everybody downs their drink. After 3 or 4 rounds of that, it's mo, bye. So, be careful with that. Politics. The Vietnamese are intensely proud of their culture and their history and their language. And you need to respect that if you're visiting there. You have ideas about things, maybe you should keep them to yourself, generally speaking. They're intensely proud of their nation, and rightly so. If you saw this long history that we went through and you saw all the struggles and all the heroes and everything that went into that, look, I'm not apologizing for the communist part of it, okay? But I'm just saying, they're proud of their country, and it is their country. And if you, criticize openly and arrogantly and vehemently, let's say, people from the North, you're probably going to find that the rest of the society is going to unite against you because they're Vietnamese. Now, this is really important. They do not hold any grudge whatsoever towards Americans. They really like Americans, except for rude tourists, of which we unfortunately have a habit of sometimes doing. So if you act like a jerk, you're going to get treated like a jerk. If you act nice, you're going to be well treated, probably better than just about anywhere else you go. Yes, sir.
I've heard somewhere, and I've read articles that said that if somebody is, be it blind or deaf or whatever, that disabilities, handicaps can be very misunderstood in some cultures. Do you know anything about how they deal with that kind of thing?
I don't really know. That's a very good question, and I don't know. I remember some sad things, like on one of the first trips back, there were some group of I think they were war veterans. They were disabled war veterans, and they were beggars, so I don't know how they deal with that. I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you because I just don't know. I kind of think that Vietnam is the most capitalist, socialist nation on earth, and that's being proved more true all the time. Their economy is booming because they have allowed for more capitalist approach to doing things. And they also have a very strong work ethic. They will work, and they can work. They're very energetic, very hardworking people. They have resolve. When they put their mind to do something, they'll continue at it until they accomplish it. They don't give up. They've got ingenuity. They figure things out. And look at all the historical experiences we saw. That builds a nation's kind of culture. Politics. Okay, politics have gone through a big change, starting with what's called Doi Moi. That was in 1986. This is when they implemented the major changes in how the Socialist Party would control the nation. And so they changed to encourage foreign investment, privately owned commodity production, and joint stock and limited liability companies, private land use, and allowing farmers to have individual enterprises as opposed to being parts of cooperatives. Smartest thing they ever did. Their economy has boomed like crazy. Okay, these are some common sayings. These are sayings that exist in Vietnamese that also exist in English. Not going to read all these. You can just take a quick look at them. They range from first come, first served to kill two birds with one stone. They're common sayings that they have, just like we do. And then there are other sayings they have that just don't make much sense to us. They kind of make sense if you read them and think about them, but we don't have a comparable, quick cliche for them. Like take the last one, sellers work, buyers don't. And I don't know how popular all these are. I have a whole book of them. All right, here's something I want to illustrate to you. When you have some poetry or something in another language and you want to translate that, it doesn't work. This is an example. Roses are red, violets are blue. Honey is sweet, and so are you. Simple little poem. What makes that a poem? It has a rhyme to it, right? Now let's do, okay, Hoa Hong, that's roses. Mao Dao, roses, red. There's no equivalent for R. Hoa An Tao, Mao San Ya Choi. Sorry, I don't see a rhyme for red and blue in that, do you? See, it just doesn't work. Honey, sweet, so are you. That doesn't work either. So therefore, you can't really translate literary works like that into something that makes sense. So oftentimes when you see a translation of something and it's billed as a translation, it's really a substitution. It takes something that has a similar meaning in our language and puts it in its place to create the same message, but it's not really a literal translation. You get blank expressions. I get those all the time when I try to express something in Vietnamese, which is my fault. All right, I want to show you the calendar. This is the old calendar. I'm showing you this only because it's interesting. They use the same calendar, the Gregorian calendar. They use that today and have for a long time. But they still use this calendar for the celebrations, the important celebrations and holidays like Tet. You've heard of Tet, Tet Nguyên Nhan. There's actually several Tet holidays. We just shorten it to one. But this lunar solar calendar thing is interesting, and it evolved from the Chinese. This is one of the things they picked up from the Chinese. The Hebrews also have a lunar solar calendar, but it's a little bit different. So it's got 12 months, 29 or 30 days, and every 3 years or so they add an extra month. So this is an engineer's explanation, okay? For those of you who don't know, that's what I did for a living. So I naturally had to come up with some kind of a formula for expressing this calendar. So there are two parts to the name of the year, as you can see right here. And so I came up with this system. So this calendar repeats itself every 12 years. Every 60 years, I'm sorry. So basically a lifetime within a lifetime. This is a calendar that shows both the Gregorian and the lunar solar years. And this is a computer app I have for that. That shows the Vietnamese dates. Everybody in Vietnam's got a cell phone. I keep this on mine to impress my wife. Whenever she wants to know about a holiday. No. Tet Nguyen Nhan is the most famous of the Tet holidays. It's the New Year, what we call the Vietnamese New Year, usually about the same time as the Chinese New Year. It's the most important festival of the year. Lots of fireworks, lion and dragon dances, big family get-togethers, lots of meals. There's always a meal. I don't care what the occasion is, there's always a big meal. So this is what they do. This is incredible to watch because there'll be a guy inside here and another one inside the front. They jump from these pedestals. Look at that, from here to here. They turn, it's just incredible. They train for this all year long. They have different troops that train for it and they compete. These are the guys that keep the pace for the dancers, these drums. Fireworks, some incredible fireworks. You'd have to watch a video to actually enjoy the fireworks. Some goods on sale for the Tet holiday. 2 flowers that are used. The yellow flowers are the choice in the south, and the pink flowers are the choice in the north. It's a mob of people in the streets for celebration. This is a little card that the children use during the holiday. They give these, they present they get this from their parents and grandparents.
Can you go back to the slide before that? What is that yellow M on that building?
That's a McDonald's. Sure enough. You know, I don't know if it's still there. I think they, oh, do you remember? She's showing me the watch. That means I'm way over time. Okay, well, let's see. This is money. This $1 is now worth 0.000043 cents, or no, dollars. So high level of inflation in the bills. Stamps. Okay, I'm going to pick up the pace. So these are some of the crops. I'm just going to let you look at it. The Mekong River Delta, I already expressed to you how important that is. This is where a lot of rice and sugarcane and coconuts and pumpkins and fruits, fish and vegetables come from. Really important agricultural area. Rice production. Rice, still a lot of manual labor. Fishing. Lots of fish. Fishing is a big deal. There's a lot of competition in the South China Sea over fishing between all those countries that are claiming the territory. Seafood is a big part of the diet. This is a look at, there's 6,600 Vietnamese fishing boats out in the South China Sea whenever this image was made. A lot of boats. These are fruits. I love this right here, soreen. Lots of fruits. Fruits are a big part of the diet. Bamboo is a simple product, but a lot of stuff is made from it. These are the best brooms you can ever use. They're very efficient. They're making the brooms from bamboo. All right, I'm going to spend a little time on this. This is the rubber plantation. The rubber product was introduced by the French. They tested some in the botanical gardens in Saigon that they brought from another country. I can't remember where it was. And it grew well, so they started planting it and building these big plantations. It's not native to Vietnam. Yeah, 1897, that's when they brought the seeds over. Michelin was a big company that got involved in that, and they had a vast amount of territory devoted to rubber plantations. This is a book written about life on the rubber plantation. This author is a socialist or sympathizer to the socialist movement, so he kind of paints a pretty bad picture of life on the plantation. This is the plantation in Yo Ting. Yo Ting is a place that I'm familiar with, and let's see, this shows a lot of the green is the rubber plantations in and around Saigon area. This is Saigon here. This is actually, 60 to 100 miles out. This one, these are some army maps from the time. This is Yo Ting, the little town of Yo Ting, and this is the big rubber plantation that's right next to it. Huge area, 48 square miles of rubber trees. They're loading the boats here. This is actually the Saigon River, even though it's about 70 miles downstream to Saigon. These are ladies are helping to unload 260-pound bundles of natural rubber. Coffee is another big product in Vietnam. Largest producer after Brazil. Soybeans, another product grown in Vietnam, particularly in the north. Hydroelectric power, they've built lots of them, and they're building more of them. The nameplate capacity of this one exceeds Hoover Dam. I'm still scratching my head on that, wondering why. Coal is mined in Vietnam. Bauxite, another mineral. Crude oil and natural gas. Remember we talked about the South China Sea? This is an exploration map of the South China Sea. These are plots that have been identified and are being explored. This is another map showing the potential for oil and gas in the South China Sea. So it's an important area. This is also a volatile area. This is also an area that we need to be careful about. Solar power, they've got a lot of solar power built, but they don't have the transmission system in place yet to really effectively utilize it. The U.S. and Vietnam have a bilateral trade agreement. It's been in place since 2000. I mean, we have free trade between the two countries. They don't pay a tariff and we don't pay a tariff. Samsung cell phones, my cell phone's made in Vietnam. This is a Honda factory in Hanoi. They got a bunch of economic zones, a lot of manufacturing parks. This is outside of Ho Chi Minh City. Some odds and ends here. This is the new metro system they're building. The Long Binh, some of you may remember the name Long Binh. We had a big base called Long Binh. This is the terminal in what was once a park not far from the big Saigon market, central market, underground system. This is their plan. This is the line they're building, and this is their long-range plan.
Is it gonna go all the way up to Hanoi?
No, not that, but they are planning to build a high-speed rail system to go all the way to Hanoi from Saigon. There are 33 national parks now. They have a pretty good national park system. This is one of them. You may recall hearing about the world's largest cave, Song Dong Cave. That's in that park. I think maybe this one of these pictures is from that. I don't have the full caption, but I believe this is it. See the people right there? It's amazingly big. Okay, clothing. This is the classic ao dai from more modern times, like the maybe 1940s forward. This is a more formal version of that. Very beautiful dress. This is an older type of dress. It says from 1830. These are some pictures of 1866, just some common people. Look at the type of hat. See this hat right here? Different kind. I forget the name of that. These are people from the Nguyen dynasty in their traditional, formal, official clothes. This is the men's version of the ao dai. These are one of the tribal minorities. Their clothing is very colorful. Here's a picture that's taken in the 1920s, and this lady is from today. She's trying to wear the authentic same design as was worn in earlier times. Extremely colorful people. This is not the majority of Vietnam. This is just these tribal groups. This is the classic non-lai that we probably have all seen pictures of it. It's very effective at keeping the sun off of you. There's a 1970s hairdo for sure, huh? Just people, ordinary clothes, and a little more formal. A mix of clothes. Now, what do you see right there? They're holding hands. There's two ladies holding hands. Does that bother you?
No, it's still put in India also.
Yeah. Just look at this. This is no longer allowed, but.
What's that?
I'm sorry. There's like a man and four kids on one little motor scooter. These are people coming out of the factory. So they look dressed almost like us. A few exceptions. This lady's wearing something a little bit more casual. Workers in the field still wearing the old hat. They hadn't found anything any better. And here we have modern business attire. I totally approve the no tie trend. Musical instruments, I'll just skip that. Food tour, okay, the rest of this is just pictures. Okay, so we're going to just click through and look at food. I'll give you just a minute on each one to read.
As far as their music, do they use an Asian five-tonal scale, or is it different yet?
You are asking the wrong fella. Unfortunately, I have zero musical talent or knowledge, so I don't know. It doesn't sound the same, I can tell you that. I love this dish. Daniel, we're just clicking through pictures of food right now. Yeah, making everybody hungry right before lunch.
Oh, yum.
Okay, key characteristics: freshness, minimal cooking, rice, lots of vegetables, heavy on fish and seafood, light on beef, pork, and chicken, very light on sugar, mild spice, but very flavor, and cleanliness.
Yeah.
Do you all have a favorite Vietnamese restaurant that y'all enjoy that's authentic?
I think Nu would tell you Pho forever.
Where's that? You can tell me after you're talking.
Yeah, I can't remember the street name right now. It's in Cordova. It's not like Houston, I can tell you that. I miss that greatly. Come to our house at around this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, y'all's house.
Yeah, we've made. No, I'm talking about this, making this. My wife and I had fun making that. She's taught me how to do that. Desserts. Okay, so Café Sudai, that's an old classic. This came from the French, one of the good things the French did. Okay, last section, scenic tour. For who's planning on going on vacation, this is a great one to look at. We're going to start at the north and go south. I'm just going to flip the pictures. If you see something you want to know about, just speak up. This is the highest mountain. This is rice being grown on the side of the mountain, so they have to terrace it so they can flood it. And
Are those walking pathways?
they're walking along the edge of the dam. That's nothing. You can see them walking across on a stick of bamboo without falling down. I don't know how they do it. Okay. This is a glass bridge. Okay, it's a glass bottom bridge. No walking bridge. No, thank you. Dinosaur back. That's a nickname. No guardrails. That's the tip of the dinosaur back. This is that big cave I was telling you about. Look at these tents down here at the bottom of it. Thing is huge. This is in Hanoi. Ha Long Bay is a very famous tourist place. It's a very unique terrain. You have all these little rocks that stick up out of the bay. See? It's really cool. I'm going to tell you one little story right here. This is a place that Nu and I went with her brother and his wife. And you get on this little boat, and there'd be a lady paddling the boat, and two paddles, boat paddles. She paddled the boat with her feet, and she had another lady came by in a boat like that, except in her boat she had a printer, a camera, and a battery. She would take your picture and then process your picture while she's paddling along, and then when she's done, you get the picture. Wow. We have that picture of us taken like that. This is Hue, the old citadel. Hoi An, I've never been here. It's a unique city. It's very small streets. It's a very old trading city. Has a lot of Japanese influence it was like a Japanese trading city at one time. I'm talking about way back, not World War II, but way back. Hai Van Pass, this is where the mountains come all the way out to the sea, and the only way to get from north to south is across this pass. Dragon Bridge here that spews out fire or spews out water. Beaches, beautiful beaches. Another one of the Cham ruins. A beach.
Patrick, do they dress pretty modestly? The women dress pretty modestly there?
Yes, they're more modern now, than they used to be. They're not dressed as traditionally, but they're still reasonably modest. Dalat is a city up in the mountains. It's kind of an old French resort, really. Beach. Nu and I have been to this beach. There's the big sand dunes around there. So it's the Saigon. Look at this. Look at the buildings. Incredibly, how much growth there's been. There's Nui Ba Den. There you can ride this up the side of Nui Ba Den. There's a big park up there.
They got a cable car?
Yeah, it's like a ski lift kind of thing, but yeah, like a cable car. Exactly, a cable car, not a ski lift. This is, remember we're talking about the Mekong River Delta and the commerce? Look at this. They're buying and selling fruits and other things. There, you can get your coffee. She's in one boat. She's making a cup of coffee for somebody else.
She must have a lit fire in that boat for her to do it.
Yeah. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for enduring a long presentation. Yes, sir.
The only one sad thing,
What?
I can't go there because they don't use the word Z, they can call my name.
They'll just use it, they'll just substitute the letter D because the D sound, the two